Hello, dear students. Today we are going to have a brief discussion on how to approach a text. Okay? But in order to do so, we must first understand what is a text. For the sake of simplicity, let's assume that a text is anything that can be read and interpreted, and it is through this reading that a meaning can be arrived at by the reader, by you, that is. When a thing, a subject, for the lack of a better word, undergoes this process of from reading to making meaning, it is at that moment, it is in this process that a text is born. It is when a text is born. In that sense, I too am a text because you are reading my gestures, my verbal cues, and non-verbal ones as well to arrive at some kind of a meaning about me. This brings us to the question on how to approach a text. The answer to that question is difficult, complex, and subjective. But this is where I suppose experience and long exposure comes to one's aid. One surefire way of approaching a text, indeed any text, is to locate the text in its context. By context, I mean not only the time in which the text was written or created and the factors in which influenced its creation, namely society, economy, politics, culture, religion, and sixth, ideology, the usual suspects. But by context, I also mean the time in which you, the reader, is reading the text and the factors that come to bear their influence on your perception and, by extension, your reading of the text and consequently meaning creation, namely society, economy, politics, culture, religion, and ideology. This, it's the second premise that of contextualization of a text, that is, it's reading by a reader who is intrinsically bound in the time and space in which she or he is reading the text, which requires a greater elaboration. Okay? So, take for instance the Victorian age, that is, the 19th century. Now, a great many writers like Jane Austen, Charles Dickens, Elizabeth Gaskell, Charlotte Bronte, George Eliot, John Stuart Mill, Thomas Hardy, to name a few, all of who belong to this age, in one way or another, talked about the plight of women and the tragedies these poor creatures would suffer in a patriarchal society. However, a deeper dive would tell us that the word patriarchy itself comes into existence around mid 17th century. Furthermore, the negative connotations and meanings associated with that word, rightly so I may add, come into existence with the advent of feminism as a critical theory as we come to know it today. So, a John Stuart Mill writing the subjection of women in the 1869 and a Simone de Beauvoir writing the second sex in 1949 are not only writing from different perspectives and points of time, but the reader who is reading these two texts would also be looking at them from different perspectives, even though she or he may be reading them in the same space and time. But what is more important and interesting is the mental landscape of the reader who is reading these two texts today, as opposed to a reader who's reading them in the 1940s or 1950s, is going to be vastly different because knowledge is an ever evolving element, and hence the consequent experiential understanding of an individual, a society, a culture also evolves over a period of time given the right kind of stimulus. So today's reader is aware that a gender is a fluid thing encapsulated in a wide ranging spectrum of nomenclatures such as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, asexual, and many, many more such identities. Today's reader is or should be acutely aware of the fact that both these texts are by design or accident silent on transgender. For it is this understanding on part of the reader about what the text says and does not say that its nuance can be apprehended. So far clear? It is for this reason, and keeping in mind this mutating and mutable nature of the reader who makes the text a timeless thing, that the critic Hans Robert Jauss would say that in each age, in every age, the reader's horizon of expectation or Erwartung Horizont forever keep expanding. Thank you, dear student. Have a great, great day.